The hall was enormous. It stretched so far in every direction that the ceiling disappeared into a soft blue glow, like a fake sky made of light. Thousands of beings filled the rows of seats that curved around a central platform. Some were tall and thin, with silver skin. Others were short and covered in dark fur. A few floated above their seats, their bodies made of something between smoke and glass. The Galactic Court of the Valari Empire was the most powerful place in the known universe, and today, every seat was full. Taiwan stood near the back wall. He was not sitting. He had no seat. Humans were not invited to events like this. They were tolerated at best and ignored at worst. He wore a long dark robe that covered most of his body and a hood that hid his face. He looked like any other low-level trader who had wandered into the wrong building. That was the idea. He had come to the Valari homeworld 3 weeks ago on a cargo ship, deliver medical supplies to a small human colony on the edge of Valari space, and go home. But the colony had been shut down. The supplies were taken. No one told him why. So he stayed. He asked questions. He moved carefully through the lower markets and listened. And slowly, he began to hear things that worried him. There were whispers about the Queen, about danger, about someone inside the court who wanted her dead. Taiwan did not know the Queen. He had never seen her in person, but he knew what the Valari had done for humans during the border wars 6 years ago. When 3 human colonies were burning and no one came to help, it was the Valari fleet that answered. Queen Yuna's mother had sent her ships across 2 star systems to protect strangers. Thousands of human lives were saved that day. Taiwan's younger sister was one of them. So when he heard the whispers, he did not leave. He stayed. Now he stood in the great court, hidden among the crowd, watching everything. The court was called to order by a tall Valari official with pale blue skin and 4 narrow eyes. He struck a long staff against the stone floor 3 times, and the sound echoed like thunder. The crowd fell silent. Then she entered. Queen Yuna walked through a tall archway at the far end of the hall. She was not what Taiwan expected. She was younger than he imagined. Her skin was a soft shade of violet, and her eyes glowed faintly, like 2 small moons set into her face. Her hair, if it could be called that, was a flowing wave of thin silver threads that moved on their own, reacting to the air and light around her. She wore a long white gown with golden patterns that seemed to shift and change as she moved. On her head sat a simple crown, a thin band of pale crystal that barely caught the light. She walked slowly, with calm and grace, but Taiwan could see something in her posture, a tension, a weight. She was not relaxed. She was alert. Behind her walked 6 guards in black armor. Their weapons were visible, long energy staffs that hummed with a low sound. They scanned the crowd with cold focus. Yuna reached the throne and turned to face the court. She did not sit right away. She stood and looked out at the hundreds of faces watching her. For a moment, the hall was completely still. Then she sat, and the court began. The first few matters were boring: trade agreements, border reports, a dispute between 2 species over mining rights on a dead moon. Taiwan listened to all of it, but his eyes kept moving. He was not here for politics. He was here because somewhere in this hall someone wanted the Queen dead, and he did not know who. He watched the advisors on the platform. There were 5 of them, seated in a row to the left of the throne. Most of them looked calm, but one, a broad-shouldered Valari male with darker skin and sharp features, sat too still. His hands were flat on his knees. His jaw was tight. He was not listening to the reports. He was watching the Queen. Taiwan made a mental note of his face. An hour passed, then 2. The court moved through its business slowly. Taiwan shifted his weight from one foot to the other and kept his hood low. No one had looked at him. No one had noticed him. That was good. Then something changed. A messenger entered the court from a side door. He was small and moved quickly, almost running. He went straight to the row of advisors and leaned close to the broad-shouldered one. The advisor's expression did not change, but his left hand tightened into a fist for just a second. Taewon saw it. The messenger left. The advisor leaned back in his chair and looked straight ahead, calm again. But Taewon had spent years reading people. He had survived on ships and stations where trust was rare and danger was common. He knew what a man looked like when he received bad news or new orders. Something was going to happen. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Taewon pulled his hood a little lower and stayed where he was. Then, without warning, Queen Yuna turned her head. Not toward her advisors, not toward the speaker on the platform. She turned toward the back of the hall, toward the wall, toward him. Her glowing eyes swept across the crowd and then stopped. She was looking directly at Taewon. He felt his chest tighten. He did not move. He did not breathe. There was no way she could know he was there. He was hidden. He was nobody. But her eyes stayed on him. And slowly, very slowly, the smallest expression appeared on her face. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was recognition. Taewon's heart began to beat faster. He had never met this queen. He had never spoken to any Velari royal. There was no reason for her to notice him, let alone recognize him. But the look on her face was clear. She knew what he was. She knew he was human. And from the way her gaze held steady, calm, measuring, certain, she had been waiting for him. The court continued around them, voices filling the enormous hall with sound. But between the queen on her throne and the human standing against the far wall, there was a silence that no one else could hear. Something had begun, and neither of them could stop it now. The court session ended late in the evening. The delegates filed out through the wide doors, their voices mixing into a low hum that filled the corridors. Guards stood at every exit, watching the crowd move. Taewon moved with them, keeping his head down, his steps matching the pace of those around him. He was good at disappearing. He had done it his whole life. But he could still feel her eyes on him. Even now, walking through the stone corridor with hundreds of aliens around him, he could not shake the feeling that Queen Yuna had seen something in him that no one else had. He found a small room in the lower levels of the court building. It was barely more than a storage closet, a narrow bed, a metal table, and a light that flickered every few minutes. It was the kind of room they gave to visiting traders who were too unimportant to house properly. Taewon did not mind. He had slept in worse places. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled down his hood. His face was plain. Dark eyes, short black hair, a thin scar across his left cheek from a fight he barely remembered. He was 31 years old, and most of those years had been hard. He had worked on cargo ships since he was 16. He had fought in dock brawls, survived pirate raids, and once walked 3 days across a frozen moon after his transport crashed. He was not a soldier. He was not a spy. He was just a man who had learned to survive. But the queen had looked at him like he was something more. He leaned back against the cold wall and closed his eyes. He thought about what he had seen in the court, the broad-shouldered advisor, the messenger, the fist that tightened for just a second. It was not proof of anything, but Taewon had learned long ago that small things mattered more than big ones. A glance in the wrong direction, a word spoken too quickly, a hand that moved when it should have stayed still. He needed to find out who that advisor was. It took him 2 days. He asked careful questions in the lower markets. He bought drinks for dock workers and listened to their stories. He sat in corners, and watched people move through the hallways of the government district. And slowly, the name came to him. Deho. General Deho of the Valari Imperial Guard, one of the most powerful military leaders in the Empire. He had served the Queen's mother before her, and when Yuna took the throne, he had stayed. He was respected, he was feared, and according to the people who whispered in the dark corners of the market, he was not happy. The story was simple. Yuna was young. She had taken the throne only 2 years ago after her mother died from a sudden illness. Many in the military believed she was too soft. She had opened new trade routes with species that the old guard considered enemies. She had spoken publicly about peace in a galaxy that had known only war for centuries. Deho did not believe in peace. He believed in strength, and he believed that a queen who talked about peace was a queen who would get her people killed. Taewon understood the situation now. It was old and familiar. Power against power. The young leader with new ideas, and the old soldier who could not let go of the past. It happened everywhere. On ships, on stations, on planets. The details changed, but the story was always the same. On the third night, something happened that changed everything. Taewon was walking through a quiet corridor near the court's lower entrance, when 2 guards stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. They were tall, dressed in the black armor of the royal guard. Their faces were hidden behind smooth helmets. "Come with us." It was not a request. Taewon's body went tight. His hands stayed at his sides, but his mind was already working. 2 guards, narrow corridor, no weapons on him. If they wanted to kill him, they would have done it already. So this was something else. He followed them. They walked through corridors he had not seen before. The walls changed from rough stone to smooth crystal. The lights grew warmer. The air smelled different, clean and faintly sweet, like flowers he could not name. They were going up, toward the royal levels. They stopped in front of a tall door made of pale wood, with golden lines running through it. One of the guards pressed his hand against the surface, and the door slid open, without a sound. Inside was a room unlike anything Taewon had ever seen. The ceiling was high and curved, and the walls were covered in a soft fabric that glowed faintly in the low light. There were no sharp edges anywhere. Everything was smooth and flowing, like the inside of a seashell. In the center of the room was a long table made of dark glass, and at the far end of the table sat Queen Yuna. She was alone. No guards, no advisors, just her. She looked at Taewon as he entered, and her glowing eyes studied him the same way they had in the court. Calm, careful, searching. "Sit," she said. Her voice was softer than he expected. There was no command in it. It was almost gentle. Taewon sat across from her. The guards closed the door behind him and stayed outside. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Yuna watched him, and he watched her. Then she reached beneath the table and placed something on the glass surface between them. It was a small metal disc, old and scratched. Taewon recognized it immediately. It was a human military tag, the kind worn by soldiers during the border wars. "Do you know what this is?" Yuna asked. "Yes," Taewon said. "It is a soldier's mark." "It belonged to a human," Yuna said. "A woman. She came to our fleet during the war and fought beside my mother. She saved the command ship when it was boarded. She killed 11 enemy soldiers with her hands alone. My mother kept this tag until the day she died." Taewon looked at the tag. He could not read the name on it. It was too worn. "My mother told me about humans," Yuna continued. "She said they were strange, small, weak-looking, no claws, no armor, no venom. But when the fighting started, they changed. She said it was like watching something wake up inside them. Something old. Something that did not care about pain or fear or death." Taewon said nothing. "I saw you in the court," Yuna said. "You were hiding, but I could feel you. your heartbeat, your heat. You are different from everything else in that room. Every other being there was afraid or angry or bored. But you were watching. Like a hunter. She leaned forward slightly. I know there are people in my court who want me dead. I know I cannot trust my own generals. I know that the guards outside this door may answer to someone else before they answer to me. Her eyes held his. But I remember what my mother told me about humans, and I believe her. The room was silent. The soft glow of the walls made the shadows gentle. Taewon looked at the old military tag on the table, and then he looked at the young queen who sat alone in a room full of enemies. He did not owe her anything. He had come here by accident. He was a traitor, a nobody. But his sister was alive because of the Valari, and the queen's mother had kept a human soldier's tag until the day she died. Some debts did not need words. What do you need? Taewon asked. But something in her eyes shifted. A light that had been dim grew just a little brighter. I need you to stay, she said. The next morning, the court gathered again. The same enormous hall, the same rows of delegates from across the galaxy, the same soft blue glow that made the ceiling look like an endless sky. Everything was the same as before, except for one thing. Taewon was not standing at the back wall. He was not hiding in the crowd. He was not wearing his trader's robe or keeping his hood low. Today, he stood in the open, near the side of the hall, dressed in plain dark clothes with nothing covering his face. His hands were empty. His expression was calm, and every alien in the room could see exactly what he was. A human. The whispers started before the queen even entered. Delegates leaned toward each other, their voices low and fast. Some of them had never seen a human in person before. Others had heard stories. Wild, frightening stories about a species from a small blue planet that should have been nothing, but had somehow survived everything the galaxy threw at them. Taewon ignored the whispers. He had heard worse. The tall official struck his staff against the floor 3 times, and the crowd fell silent. Queen Yuna entered through the same archway as before. She walked with the same calm grace, her silver hair moving gently in the air, her glowing eyes looking straight ahead. The 6 guards followed behind her in their black armor. She reached the throne and turned to face the court. But she did not sit. Instead, she spoke. Before we begin today's matters, she said, and her voice carried through the entire hall without effort. There is something I must address. The court waited. Every eye was on her. Many of you have noticed that there is a human in this hall, she continued. Some of you are surprised. Some of you are uncomfortable. I understand. Humans are rare in our space, and their reputation is complicated. She paused and let the word hang in the air. But I did not come to this throne to make comfortable choices. I came here to make the right ones. She turned her head and looked directly at Taewon. The entire court followed her gaze. 1,000 alien eyes landed on the humans standing by the wall. Taewon, the queen said clearly, step forward. The hall went silent. Not the polite silence of waiting, the deep, heavy silence of shock. Taewon felt the weight of every gaze in the room. His heart was beating hard, but his face showed nothing. He had agreed to this the night before. Yuna had told him what she planned to do, and he had not argued. He understood why it had to be public. A secret guard was useful, but a public declaration was something else entirely. It was a message. He walked forward. His steps echoed on the stone floor. The distance from the wall to the central platform was not far, but it felt like crossing an ocean. Delegates pulled back slightly as he passed, as if his presence carried a charge they could feel. He reached the base of the platform and stopped. He looked up at the queen. Yuna looked back at him, and then she turned to the court. 6 years ago, she said, during the border wars, My mother sent the Volari fleet to protect 3 human colonies that were under attack. She did this without being asked. She did this because she believed that strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. She took a slow breath. During that mission, a human soldier boarded my mother's command ship and fought beside our warriors. She had no armor, no energy weapons, no enhancements of any kind. She fought with her bare hands and a broken piece of metal she pulled from the wall. She killed 11 enemy soldiers who had breached the bridge. The court listened in silence. My mother never forgot that soldier. She kept her identification tag until the day she died. And before she passed, she told me something I have carried with me ever since. Yuna's voice grew quieter, but somehow it filled the hall even more. She said, "Never underestimate a human. They are small and soft and breakable, but inside them is something that doesn't stop, something that doesn't give up, something that every other species in this galaxy lost a long time ago." She looked at Taewon again. "I have reason to believe that my life is in danger. I have reason to believe that the threat comes from inside this court. I will not name anyone today, but I will do something that has never been done in the history of the Volari Empire." She raised her hand, and a guard stepped forward carrying a small crystal box. Yuna opened it and lifted out a thin silver band, similar to the one she wore on her head, but smaller. It glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft light. "This is the band of the shield," she said. "It has not been given in 400 years. It is the mark of the Queen's personal protector, someone who answers to no general, no advisor, no counsel, only to me." She stepped down from the platform. The guards moved to follow her, but she held up her hand, and they stopped. She walked alone, down the steps, across the stone floor, until she stood in front of Taewon. She was taller than him by almost a head. Her violet skin glowed softly in the light of the hall. Her eyes looked down into his, and in that moment, the entire galaxy seemed to shrink, until there was nothing left but the two of them. "Taewon," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "you do not have to do this. You can walk away, and I will not stop you." Taewon looked up at her. He thought about his sister. He thought about the old military tag, scratched and worn. He thought about a soldier he had never met, who fought with her bare hands on a burning ship to save people she did not know. "I am not walking away," he said. Something moved in Yuna's expression. It was small and quick, the faintest softening around her eyes, like ice melting for just a second before freezing again. She lifted the silver band and placed it on his wrist. It tightened gently and sealed itself against his skin. A warm pulse ran through his arm. Then she turned back to the court. "From this moment," she announced, "this human is under my direct authority. Any threat against him is a threat against me. Any order given to him by anyone other than me is without power." She let the words settle over the hall like falling snow. "And I want every being in this room to understand something clearly." Her voice dropped, and the glow in her eyes brightened. "I did not choose him because I am desperate. I chose him because my mother taught me what humans are capable of. And if anyone in this court believes they can take my throne through violence and treachery, they should think very carefully about what it means to have a human standing between them and me." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. Then Yuna turned, walked back up the steps, and sat on her throne. "Now," she said, her voice returning to its normal calm tone, "let us continue with today's business." Taewon stood at the base of the platform, facing the court. He could feel the silver band warm against his wrist. He could feel the stares of 1,000 beings, some afraid, some angry, some curious. He could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him like a hand on his chest. He was no longer a traitor. He was no longer a nobody. He was the shield of the queen, and somewhere in this hall, among the hundreds of faces watching him, was the person who wanted her dead. Taewan's eyes moved slowly across the crowd, row by row, face by face, and when his gaze passed over the row of advisors, he found the one he was looking for. Daeho sat perfectly still. His expression was empty. His hands rested flat on his knees. He did not look angry. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had already made his next move. Taewan held his gaze for 2 full seconds, and then he looked away. The game had changed, but it was far from over. 3 days passed after the ceremony. The court returned to its normal business, but the mood had changed. There was a new tension in the air, a heaviness that sat behind every conversation and every glance. Everyone knew something was coming. No one said it out loud. Taewan spent those 3 days learning the Queen's palace. He walked every corridor. He counted every door. He memorized the layout of every staircase, every side passage, every window that could be opened, and every wall that could be breached. The palace was old and beautiful, built from pale stone and crystal that caught the light in ways that made the walls look alive. But beauty did not mean safety. Taewan found 17 points where an attacker could enter without being seen by the main guard stations. He reported all of them to Yuna. She listened without interrupting, sitting in her private study, with her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she looked at him with those steady, glowing eyes, and said, "You found all of this in 3 days?" "Yes. My security team has been here for years. They found none of it." Taewan said nothing to that. He did not need to. Yuna reassigned her personal guards based on his findings. She did it quietly, without telling Daeho or the other advisors. The new positions covered the weak points Taewan had found. It was not perfect, but it was better than before. On the 4th night, Taewan could not sleep. He lay on a narrow bed in a small room near the Queen's chambers, a room she had ordered prepared for him. The silver band on his wrist pulsed gently in the dark, a slow heartbeat of light. He stared at the ceiling and listened. The palace was never fully quiet. There were always sounds. The hum of energy systems behind the walls, the distant footsteps of guards on patrol, the faint whisper of wind moving through the crystal towers above. Taewan had learned to read these sounds the way a sailor reads the sea. When everything was normal, the sounds blended together into a steady rhythm. When something changed, the rhythm broke. At 2:30 in the morning, the rhythm broke. It was a small thing, a pause in the footsteps of the guard who walked the corridor outside the Queen's chambers. The guard passed every 12 minutes, Taewan had counted. But this time, the footsteps came at 10 minutes, and then they stopped. Taewan was on his feet before he finished thinking. He pulled on his boots, grabbed the only weapon he had, a short blade that Yuna had given him from the palace armory, and moved to his door. He opened it slowly. The corridor was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the crystal walls. To his left, about 20 steps away, the guard lay on the floor. He was not dead. Taewan could see his chest moving, but he was unconscious. A small dart stuck out from the side of his neck. Taewan's blood turned cold. He moved fast. Not running. Running made noise. He moved in quick, silent steps, staying close to the wall. The Queen's chamber was around the next corner, behind a heavy door that required a handprint to open. But as Taewan turned the corner, he saw that the door was already open. Not broken, not forced. Opened from the inside. Someone with access had let them in. Taewan stepped through the door. The Queen's outer chamber was a large room with soft furniture and tall windows that looked out over the city below. Moonlight poured through the glass, painting everything in shades of silver and blue. The room looked empty, but it was not. 3 figures stood in the shadows near the far wall. They wore dark suits that blended with the darkness. Not Valari military armor, but something lighter, designed for speed and silence. Assassins, professional ones. And standing behind them, half hidden in the doorway that led to the queen's bedroom, was Deho. He wore no armor. He was dressed in simple clothes, as if he had been sleeping. But his eyes were wide awake, and in his hand was a long energy blade that glowed with a faint red light. Taewon and Deho saw each other at the same moment. Deho's expression twisted. Surprise, then anger, then something harder and colder. The look of a man who had planned everything perfectly and now realized that one piece did not fit. "Kill him," Deho said. His voice was low and sharp. "Kill him and then take the queen." The 3 assassins moved. They were fast, faster than any human could match in a straight race. They spread out, coming at Taewon from 3 angles, their movements smooth and practiced. Each one carried a short curved blade that hummed with energy. Taewon did not try to match their speed. He did something else. Something that humans had been doing since before they had language or fire or tools. He stopped thinking and started reacting. The first assassin reached him and swung a blade at his throat. Taewon dropped his weight, letting his knees bend, and the blade cut the air above his head. He drove his own blade forward and felt it connect with the assassin's leg. The alien screamed and stumbled. Taewon grabbed his arm, twisted it, and threw him into the second assassin, who was coming from the left. They crashed together and fell. The third one was already on him. A blade came at his ribs. Taewon turned sideways, and the blade sliced across his arm instead of his chest. Pain exploded through his body, hot and bright. He ignored it. It told him where the blade was. He caught the assassin's wrist with his free hand, pulled him close, and drove his forehead into the alien's face. The alien's head snapped back. Taewon hit him again, a short, brutal punch to the throat. The assassin choked and dropped his blade. Taewon picked it up. Now he had 2 weapons. The first 2 assassins were back on their feet. The one Taewon had cut in the leg was limping, but still moving. They looked at each other, and something passed between them, a moment of doubt. They had expected a quick kill. They had not expected this. Taewon did not give them time to think. He went forward, not backward, not sideways, forward, straight at them. He moved like water and struck like stone. Every step was a decision. Every movement had a purpose. He was not graceful. He was not elegant. He was efficient. He hit what needed to be hit and moved where he needed to move. And he did not stop. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, all 3 assassins were on the ground. One was unconscious. One was bleeding and unable to stand. The third was curled against the wall, holding his broken arm against his chest. Taewon stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. Blood ran down his left arm from the cut, dripping onto the floor in slow, steady drops. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rush of everything his body had done without asking permission. He looked up. Daeho still stood in the doorway to the queen's bedroom. The red energy blade was still in his hand. He stared at Taewon with wide eyes, and for the first time since Taewon had seen him in the court, the general's face showed something real. Fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from seeing a weapon or hearing a threat. Something deeper. The kind of fear that comes from watching something you do not understand. The kind of fear that ancient creatures felt when they saw fire for the first time and realized they were no longer the most dangerous thing in the dark. "What are you?" Daeho whispered. Taewon gripped his blades and took a step forward. "I am exactly what she said I was," he answered. Behind Daeho in the bedroom, A light came on, and in that light, Taewon could see Queen Yuna standing beside her bed, awake and alert. She was holding a small crystal device in her hand, a communication unit. She had already called for help. She looked past Daeho and met Taewon's eyes. She was not afraid. She was standing tall, with the calm stillness of someone who had made her choice and did not regret it. The sound of running footsteps echoed from the corridor. The loyal guards were coming. Daeho heard them too. He looked at his fallen assassins. He looked at the human blocking his path. He looked at the queen behind him, untouched and unbroken. And in that moment, he understood that he had lost. The loyal guards arrived in a storm of heavy boots and humming weapons. They filled the corridor and poured into the queen's chambers, their armor catching the moonlight as they took positions around the room. The 3 fallen assassins were dragged away, bound and silent. Medics rushed in behind the guards, their hands already glowing with healing light. Daeho did not fight. When the guards surrounded him, he let the red energy blade fall from his hand. It hit the floor with a dull sound, and its light went dark. He stood still as they took his arms and locked his wrists in heavy restraints. His face was empty, not the controlled emptiness of a man hiding his thoughts, but the hollow emptiness of a man who had nothing left. 2 guards led him out of the room. He did not look back at the queen. He did not look at Taewon. He walked with his head straight, his steps steady, and disappeared into the corridor like a shadow swallowed by light. The room began to fill with more people, advisors, officials, members of the court who had been woken by the alarms. They stood in clusters, whispering, their eyes moving between the bloodstains on the floor and the human who stood in the center of it all. Taewon had not moved. He stood where he had fought, still holding both blades. His left arm was soaked in blood from the cut that ran from his shoulder to his elbow. His breathing had slowed, but his body still vibrated with the energy of the fight. A medic tried to approach him, but he shook his head. Not yet. Not until the room was secure. Yuna stepped out of her bedroom. She walked through the doorway that Daeho had stood in just minutes before, and the crowd parted for her without being told. She wore a simple sleeping gown, and her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders, moving gently as if stirred by a breeze that no one else could feel. She had no crown, no royal garments, no symbols of her power. She looked like any ordinary person, woken in the middle of the night. But there was nothing ordinary about the way the room went silent when she appeared. She looked at the bloodstains on the floor. She looked at the broken furniture where the assassins had fallen. She looked at the scratches on the walls and the scorch marks from the energy blades. Then she looked at Taewon. He met her gaze. His dark eyes were steady, but she could see the exhaustion behind them. The fight had cost him, not just the wound on his arm, but something deeper, the kind of toll that comes from forcing your body to do things it was never designed to do, against enemies that were faster and stronger in every way that could be measured, because humans could not be measured. "You are hurt," Yuna said. "It is not deep," Taewon replied. "Let the medics help you." After. After what? Taewon looked around the room at the faces watching them. Advisors who had served under Daeho. Officials who may have known about the plot. Guards whose loyalty was still uncertain. The danger was not over. The general had been caught, but his roots ran deep into the empire. Cutting the head off a snake meant nothing if the body can still strike. "After I know you are safe," he said. Something changed in the room. It was not a sound or a movement. It was a feeling, a shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. The aliens watching this exchange understood something. The human was bleeding. He was tired. He had just fought 3 trained killers and a general of the Imperial Guard. And his only thought was whether the Queen was protected. This was what Yuna's mother had seen on that burning ship 6 years ago. This was what she had tried to explain to her daughter. Not strength, not speed, not strategy. Something else. Something that had no name in the Valari language. Humans called it many things. Duty, loyalty, stubbornness, love. But none of those words were quite right either. It was all of them at once. A fire that burned inside them that nothing could put out. Not pain, not fear, not logic, not the certain knowledge that they were smaller, weaker, and shorter-lived than almost everything in the galaxy. They burned anyway. Yuna turned to the room. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a throne and a crown, and 400 years of Valari history. What happened tonight was a betrayal, she said. A betrayal by someone I trusted. Someone this court trusted. General Deho planned to take my life and seize control of this empire. He failed, not because of our security systems, not because of our guards, and not because of our technology. She paused. He failed because of one human. The room was perfectly still. I want every person in this hall to remember what they saw tonight. Remember the blood on this floor. Remember who shed it and who it was shed for. And remember that when this empire faced its darkest moment, it was not a Valari who stood between me and death. She turned to Taiwan. She walked toward him slowly, and the crowd watched in silence. When she reached him, she stood close enough that he could see the faint pulse of light in her eyes, the rhythm of it matching the beat of her heart. She reached up and removed something from around her neck. It was a small pendant, a piece of pale crystal, shaped like a star, hanging from a thin silver chain. It was not a formal symbol of office. It was something personal, something old. This belonged to my mother, Yuna said quietly. She wore it the day the human soldier saved her ship. She told me that when the fighting was over and the soldier was bleeding on the floor of the bridge, she took this pendant and pressed it into the soldier's hand. She said it was the only thing she could think of to say thank you. She held it out to Taiwan. I do not have the right words either, she said, but I have this. Taiwan looked at the pendant. It was small and simple and old, the kind of thing that had no value to anyone except the person who carried it. He thought about the military tag Yuna had shown him in their first meeting. The scratched metal disc with a name he could not read. A soldier he had never met, who fought on a ship far from home for people who were not her own. He took the pendant and closed his hand around it. The crystal was warm against his skin. Thank you, he said. Yuna nodded. Then she turned back to the room, and her voice rose again, strong and clear. Let it be known throughout the Empire. From this day forward, the Valari recognize humanity as an allied species under the full protection of the Crown. Any act of hostility toward human settlements, ships, or citizens within our borders will be treated as an act of war against the Valari Empire itself. The words fell into the silence, like stones into water. Ripples spread through the crowd. Shock, confusion, admiration, fear. The Valari Empire had never extended such protection to any species. Not in 400 years of history. Not once. And let it be known, Yuna continued, that Taiwan will remain as my shield for as long as he chooses to stay. He answers to no one but me. His word carries the weight of my word. And anyone who challenges him challenges the throne. She looked at Taiwan one final time, and in that look was something that went beyond gratitude. It was trust, the real kind, the kind that is built not from words or promises but from blood and choice, and the simple act of standing between someone and the thing that wants to destroy them. Taiwan stood in the ruined room, with blood on his arm and a crystal star in his hand, and 1,000 alien eyes watching him. He was a cargo trader from a small blue planet on the edge of nowhere. He had no army. He had no fleet. He had no special abilities or technology or power. He was just human. And in that moment, standing in the heart of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, that was more than enough. The medic approached him again, and this time Taewon nodded. He let her take his arm and begin healing the wound. The warm light washed over his skin, closing the cut slowly, layer by layer. He watched it happen and said nothing. Outside the tall windows, the first light of dawn was breaking over the Volari capital. The city stretched out below in waves of crystal and stone, glowing softly as the sun touched its towers. Ships moved silently through the sky, their lights blinking against the fading stars. Somewhere out there, across the vast emptiness of space, billions of humans lived their small, ordinary lives. They worked, they ate, they loved and fought, and laughed and cried. They did not know what had happened tonight. They did not know that a single man from their species had changed the course of an empire. But they would learn, and when they did, they would not be surprised, because every human carried the same fire inside them, the same stubborn, impossible, unbreakable thing that had kept their species alive since the first cold night on a dangerous world, when a small creature with no claws and no armor looked into the darkness and refused to be afraid. Taewon sat down on a broken chair and let the healer work. Yuna returned to her throne room to address the empire. The guards secured the palace. The sun rose higher. A new day had begun, and nothing would ever be the same.